You're too far forward. Scoot back a little bit.
I see we have a good number of folks attached here. Do you think we're waiting on any more?
Let's go ahead and give it a couple more minutes, Jim.
Okay.
I know there's a couple gentlemen trying to figure out the time zone that we're in California, so.
Yeah.
The team that hasn't joined, will get them to watch it.
Very good. We'll get started. Wanted to cover, we're going to be talking about preventing workplace violence and talking about a lot of the things that are in this subject. And heaven knows we have a headline of some type of workplace violence. Seems to be all the time. It seems to be showing up in the headlines all the time, and I don't know what it is about today's environment that there are so many folks that just discontent with everything, and it requires that we cover some of these items. And I'm going to start the presentation here, and I'm going to share my screen with you. For those of you that don't have audio, that don't have video and are just joined us on the phone, this material will be available, and I'm recording it so that you can go back over it at some time in the future. Maybe with your new hires, be a good opportunity for that. Is everybody seeing my screen all right?
I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, we can see you. Everybody
Yes,
that
sir.
just joined, if you could put your phones on mute, that would be greatly appreciated. It's getting echoey.
Very good. For those of you that have the video, the front of this presentation, the very first screen here has a picture depicting an office, and they're all going over the material. And what's funny is there is a gentleman in the back, the very back row, kind of doesn't look like he's too happy to be here. I don't know why, but maybe he's one of the disgruntled workers. But let's get into some, give you an idea of what we're going to go over today. We're going to talk about some of the fast facts, the prevalence of the workplace violence, your right to a safe workplace, the warning signs, trouble and immediate signs of danger, and what to do in case of an incident, and your post-incident analysis.
Hey, Jim, let me interrupt again. Team, please put your phones on mute. We're getting a lot of chatter in the background. So if we can, please mute the phone so we could get through this. All right, Jim, let's try it again.
Very good. And of course, we'll go over the post-incident analysis here, but I also added some material at the end to talk about specific issues pertaining to
Cover paint. What's cover paint?
pertaining
Oh, I don't have it right now. Hold on. I'm in a meeting. You're going to have to hold. I'll give them for you.
pertaining to specific to California and to Texas, kind of what your expectations are in those laws. So we're going to cover a little bit of that at the ending. It's not in the list here, but that's what we're going to do. But about 2 million Americans, employees report being victims of workplace violence, which can vary anything from just being harassed to actual physical altercations to, of course, the ones that make the headlines for shootings and that sort of thing. Homicide is still the leading cause of death in the workplace for women, which is kind of an interesting point. I would take some notes on that and take that to heart to find out what the root causes could be for that in most organizations, and kind of spend a little time understanding what that really means. That homicide is a leading cause of death for workplace for women. When this is a real concern in keeping safety, and it's something that's not emphasized enough, I don't think. You know, your employer has responsibilities. Of course, we're all under OSHA, but there are states that have state specific, and we'll cover some of that at the very end. You have the right to a safe workplace, free of hazards. This is the general duty clause. So there are requirements for this. If you work with high-risk clients, and what they mean by this is, I just saw a headline this morning talking about airlines. Airlines are having to pull every employee back and having just hammering them on how you handle difficult people in the workplace. And they thought they had an excellent program, and I'm here to tell you, they are really reevaluating everything because of all of the discontent that's being expressed on airplanes and in that environment. You can imagine somebody that's been doing that for that many years has to go back and revamp their, you know, the way their employees are interfacing with their employees, as well as they're interfacing with their clients. And they've become high risk. Which is kind of interesting. You wouldn't think airline being high risk, but they've gotten that way. You know, in this, knowing the warning signs of violent behavior, just some things that we need to talk about here. Please make sure your employees understand they have the right and a requirement to let you know as a supervisor about any verbal or physical harassment, verbal or physical threats, assault, and any behavior that causes you to be unsafe. This is a primary concern, and you have to let your employees know this is something that's not to be tolerated. Some of the warning signs. We'll talk about some of these warning signs. Behavior pattern changes. Now, there's a lot of reasons why behavior can change. In an employee, there's a lot of stressors at home. There's a lot of stressors professionally. There's a lot of stressors personally with people, and some of their habits can really stress things. And heaven knows we've been through a lot of stress in 2020 with COVID and all the challenges there. And what we're seeing in the workplace, now that employers have come back to work, they've started coming back into the offices, we started noticing that these employees are acting differently. Just you know, a pattern of change is something that you're looking for, and is this person maybe under some stress and maybe having some problems? Something you need to be aware of. Behavior changes disrupting the work environment. That's something you have to get in touch and in front of fairly quickly. You start seeing a downturn in the employee ability to perform their essential functions at work, then it's time for the supervisor to step in very formally and very quickly. You've got to step in and be sure you address that quickly. The ones that disrupt the work environment, be sure, and you'll hear me say this several times in this presentation, is anytime you deal with an employee behavioral problem, make sure that's behind closed doors, whether it's inside your vehicle with the door shut, whether it's in an office with the door closed, somewhere where you can have a private conversation. Don't ever address these when other employees are around. look for signs of stress, that are more elevated than normal, and those are that's a little more obvious. Some of these warning signs, there's a whole list here. I can tell you that, the inability to concentrate, lack of performance, and a lot of these things are some of the things we're dealing with, as a nation. The inability to concentrate, they're worried about their family, worried about the kids, worried about everything else. The inability to concentrate also goes with distraction. This complicates distractions in the workforce, which means you're distracted working, whether it's behind the wheel of a vehicle or whether you're at a job site. Distractions and having the inability to concentrate increases risk of injury and other problems. So that's also a concern. The use of drugs and alcohol increased quite a bit last year, and abuses of those are showing up in the workplace right now at a very high rate, probably the highest rate we've ever seen. I'm not talking about use, I'm talking about abuse of these substances is really taken over as a problem. And when it's abuse and when it's affecting their ability to perform their job, it becomes necessary for the supervisor to step in and offer help. Oftentimes you have employees making inappropriate statements that never used to do this before. This seems to be a common thread throughout all of a sudden this employee just becomes, they have no filter, and they become increasingly agitated and making inappropriate statements. These are some of there's a lot of things listed on the screen here. These are things that you should discuss as a supervisory and management team, to discuss how you look for these things and when do you use your best judgment to take charge of that situation and maybe have a discussion with the employee. Keep in mind, these warning signs don't always lead to violence. Sometimes just an employee in trouble, which is a good point. Sometimes if you intervene early and get it, nip it in the bud, get them some help, point them in the right direction, show them that you care, sometimes will prevent violence in the workplace. Employees that have been on destructing themselves, sometimes really don't care who they take down with them. And so finding those early warning signs is very important. Warning signs could also be just normal changes in mood. Believe me, I've worked with, I was in HR for well over 10 years. A lot of what I did was counsel employees and discuss some of their problems. And I'm telling you, anytime an employee is going through a really tough time, it will change their mood at work. It doesn't, as long as it's not affecting their job, and they don't seem to be really throwing off too many warning signs, sometimes it's best left alone. But sometimes when it steps over that boundary and starts affecting the work environment, starts affecting their performance and their ability to complete their essential functions, that's when you have to step in. Use your best judgment before reporting these issues to your supervisor. If you get a really bad feeling, trust your intuition. This is something that I will tell you, if you interview folks that supervised employees that have caused problems in the past, they're like, yeah, I should have addressed that a lot earlier. There's always a regret out there. The supervisor is always looking back about how you should have reported it earlier, should have done something about it earlier. Use your best judgment when you're doing this, and be sure you're doing this behind closed doors when no one else can hear. The nonverbal clues of potential violence, and we're talking about somebody that's just about to erupt. You'll have personal space violations. They get in your face or they get in some other employee's face. You'll see the nonverbal clues about rapid breathing, repetitive motions such as tics. You'll see them clenching their hands or the fist, clenching their jaws, trembling or shaking. Things like this are things where things are very close to getting out of hand. And that's time to really separate the employee from the rest of the other employees, or try to separate the customer or whoever it is you're interfacing with from the rest of the population if possible. Have the conversation, start trying to work on de-escalating the situation. And that's a whole nother presentation. If an incident occurs and everything else failed and it has really gone south, we're talking about situations where people are being hurt, potential of being hurt, things are really serious. Be sure, and it says call 911 immediately. Actually, your first response is get yourself safe and everybody around you, including customers and anybody else. Try to do that first before you call 911. Somebody should be on the phone, but this is part of the team approach to handling severe problems with violence in the workplaces. You should have a team. People should know I'm the one designated to call. Make that call if you can, but you make it as quickly as you can after you've secured yourself. You know, try to remain as calm as possible. If you're in direct vicinity of the person that is about to or has already caused the problem, try to make eye contact and try to gain a little time and let people get out of there. Do not provoke or argue. Try to do as much agreement as you possibly can with the person that's causing the problem. Do not try to disarm. That's not your job. Report, you know, that's for somebody else to do. Report all incidents, even the minor ones, to security and management as soon as possible. You have to let somebody know, even if it didn't result in an incident, but you thought it got close. I call them near misses. Other people call them, well, man, that could have progressed real quickly, but thank goodness we got a hold of that one. That's the one that needs to be reported to management and safety staff. And let's have a discussion about what happened, because if it happened in one place, it could happen in other places within your organization, and you need to share what you learned. So be sure those are reported, even if they're fairly minor. Ensure that your personnel, everybody in your area is safe before you try to help others. Don't put yourself in a position where you're trying to help somebody and you're in the line of fire. You've got to secure yourself before you can help other people. And then when you are safe, make sure you're talking to the proper authorities. That's kind of some main points during. Now, post-incident, there are some things that should be done. Now, whether it's a minor incident or whether it's a major incident, there should be lessons learned. Hopefully it's a fairly minor incident, but you need to come together. You need to have a discussion about, did we miss the warning sign? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. You hope that you can find ways to prevent that in the future. You know, if it's an individual that's not an employee or maybe a former employee, how'd they get into your facility? You need to ask these questions. Were authorities alerted promptly? Did all the employees that were part of the emergency response team follow the emergency action plan? Did you get the word out? Did they know what to do? And then what can be done moving forward to make this a better situation? It'll never be a perfect situation, but how can you make it better going forward? Try to reduce your hazards from a workplace incident. You know, using these lessons learned can definitely be something that something that it's often used in safety. It's used in a lot of other settings too, about lessons learned, and I promise you it'll be something that I harp on most of my presentations. Let's get into some very specific stuff. I have some stuff here from California. and I'll just go through it, I'll scan through it, I'll just kind of pick out some points that we need to probably discuss, so that we don't really lose everybody. But I will tell you that the efforts that are done in California are not that far out from what you should do in any organization. You should understand that your occupational safety health, your OSHA has requirements, that you have job postings, and that you have things posted in your work environment. The California occupational safety has their own postings about safe workplaces, in addition to the OSHA requirements. There's also, in California, employers can seek a temporary restraining order or injunctions against employees who pose a threat, which that's only in California. That does not apply in Texas. But let's talk about there is required workplace postings, and I do talk about them in here about what has to be posted. The temporary restraining orders in California are there to, anybody that's had unlawful violence that has occurred in relation to work, or is a credible threat to violence, you can actually file these things in California, which is kind of interesting. But you get into these general recommendations about what you should do as a workplace plan to prevent workplace violence. These plans should include a statement of the employer's workplace violence policy. I suggest this policy be, especially in California, I suggest it be not only in your personnel rule, your employee handbook, as it were, but maybe even posted on your bulletin boards talking about this. This is something you probably need to cover once a year with your staff. It's something that needs to be discussed, and especially your new hires coming on need to understand what your workplace violence policy is. What is your standard practices to address workplace violence? Now, this is different than your policy. How do you respond? Is there a poster anywhere that says, hey, if you have a problem in the workplace, who do you call? Who are you supposed to call? Well, you need to have something in place where you have a number to call, talk to your supervisor, or talk to somebody in HR, talk to them about this situation. That's part of your plan. Well, if something were to go down and something goes bad, and you have a bad incident at work, that's a little more serious, I would make sure you have some steps to take. What is our general operating procedure for handling workplace violence? What are we supposed to do in this particular building that I'm in if we have that situation occur? I'll tell you, the local law enforcement agencies are usually willing to come out and take a look at your facilities. If it's there at the office, there at your main administration facilities, your shop areas and things like that, to look it over and see where the best place for you to take shelter at would be. Also have that discussion with your employees about how do you take shelter without, do you take shelter? There's a lot of things that local law enforcement can help you with on that particular procedure. Designation and training of an incident response team. This is not California actually encourages this a great deal. I did not see anything where they absolutely required it by way of, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it would be good to have an incident response team on how you do that at each location. Clearly stated disciplinary procedures that should be in your policy, procedures for workplace violence, references to sources outside on how you help your employees. And this is what I was talking about earlier about having a procedure on who you call. And that's what it's talking about here. Now you get over into Texas, and and even though there's some similarities, there are some differences. While OSHA, obviously, we, in Texas, we don't have Cal Wash. We don't have these acts that require certain things in Texas. However, in addition to OSHA, Texas law also places a duty on the employer to provide employees with safe workplace. Texas law does. So what that does is makes it state law that you have certain requirements as an employer in Texas, and employees or deceased employees, survivors may bring a civil lawsuit against you if you haven't trained your employees about how to handle situations about workplace violence. So I will tell you that having your training in place, having it posted in your workplace about what your procedure is, and having that discussion with your employees is of prime importance for having a liability situation in both California and Texas. However, Texas puts it more in the legal area than maybe California. But just failed. This last paragraph down here says that means an employer that does not adequately hire, in other words, negligent hiring, lack of training, lack of supervision of its employees are always the top three that you see on a lawsuit in Texas when it comes to workplace violence. Those three will be the top things listed right there. Even though Texas doesn't have a statute or regulation explicitly governing workplace violence, you're still required to take those actions that I just listed. And here's a list of them. They're very similar to the ones you saw in California. This list that I would take to heart and make it a goal. If you have a plan in place with these items contained in your workplace violence program. Is there any questions about what we covered today? There are presentations to be done, but they're really, in my opinion, they're best suited for law enforcement personnel to come to your facility and have a discussion about what do you do when an armed person comes in, armed assailant comes in and starts shooting the place up. You need to have that discussion with your local law enforcement. Oftentimes, the local police department probably are not available for that. However, in Texas, the county sheriff's office are more than willing in most areas to come and have that discussion with you. If you just make an appointment with them, they will come in and have that discussion with you by helping you formulate a plan on how you react to an active shooter situation, as an example. And they are really good about helping with that. Sheriffs are, they seem to be more available for that discussion. And of course, there's always private entities out there willing to charge you an arm and a leg to come in and have that discussion. There are plenty of those, but I don't have one that I recommend over another. But I will tell you, this is something that needs to be discussed within your organization as a management team, supervisor team, about what you plan, how do you enact your plan, and if a situation, whether it's minor or major, that group needs to get together and have a discussion on how it was handled, how quickly it was handled, how you handled it, and can you improve on future incidences. So the minor ones are usually lead up to major ones. This is the other thing that really wasn't in this presentation, or that I didn't really emphasize a whole lot, and that is generally you have somebody that causes problems all the time. It seems to be a disciplinary issue and have addressed. You finally make that decision to separate employment. And sometimes that's an issue. If you have a question about your safety, your HR personnel, supervisor, whoever is doing the separation, if you have any questions, oftentimes having someone available from a security standpoint is not a bad idea. I can tell you, I've had some of those meetings where I knew it was not going to go well when I brought the person in. They were kind of violent, had violent tendencies, and I did not feel comfortable in that separation that employee from his employment. And I had a non-uniformed officer within one room before we were having our discussion. So, you know, if something like that happens, you need to have a plan in place on how you're going to handle that separation and how you're going to handle the security for a situation like that. Those don't happen very often, they're rare, but you still need to have a plan in place on how you're going to handle it. Keith, or anybody else, do you have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment, Jim. As we know, as we get into the summertime here, as it heats up, tempers seem to heat up and flare up quite rapidly as well. So just keep that in mind as if you do come across a disgruntled employee, subcontractor, things typically.
This meeting is being recorded.
Don't know where that came from.
I know, that was weird.
Sorry. Don't know where that came from.
So that's my comment. I did have some labor ready guys at a project that did get very escalated very quickly about trying to get them to work, and next thing you know, they were in my trailer, superintendent trailer at the time, and I was on the phone with the labor ready company, and I'm not saying labor ready, but labor people, with the owner. And as these gentlemen were screaming and yelling at us, they actually called the cops at the same time as I was just trying to get them out of my trailer so I could get away from them. So we ended up having the cops come and everything else. So again, it happens very quickly. And sometimes the heat does escalate very quick. So
Good point. Good point. Any other comments?
have any questions or comments? Anybody out there?
Oh, we're out here. We just don't have any comments.
All
Very
right,
good.
Rocky, Dallas office. You guys have any suggestions for next month's meeting?
We'll put our heads together and get back to you on that.
Okay, California office. California, any suggestions for next month's meeting? Going once, twice, 3 times a lady. Okay. Well, Jim, I appreciate your time, and that was very insightful and helpful.
Well, be sure and let us know if you have questions, and I'll look forward to next month's presentation. You guys just let me know what you want to cover.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Bye.